Welcome back. I'm Barry Craig. Wait till next year is the cry of every baseball fan whose team didn't win the World Series. Well, next year is here. And with me today to discuss the upcoming Major League season and talk a little bit about the offseason is a familiar face on the program, Leon Wurth, professional scout for the Milwaukee Brewers. Welcome to the program.
Good to be back.
Let's begin by giving us a rundown on the 2010 Milwaukee Brewers. How do they look?
We look, I think we look better than last year. I like what we did in the off season. We picked up starting pitching. Randy Wolf was our big acquisition from the Dodgers, and it gives us a veteran presence, left-hander that's had some success, and Doug Davis also, who used to be with us from Arizona. So we got two lefties that are not power arms, but someone to sandwich around Gallardo, who's our number one guy, young guy, who had a lot of stress on him last year. He didn't have a lot of help, so he was our number one guy and probably fits the role of maybe eventually a number one, but a top of the rotation guy. So we filled two veterans around him. So the starting pitching is, as we'll talk about, when you talk about who's the favorites and who's not the favorites, and nothing has changed. I mean, starting pitching is the deal. You look at the World Series teams, the Phillies.
Well, what's the old adage in baseball? Good pitching beats good hitting every time.
Unless it's Yogi Berra and he says, or vice versa. So, yeah, it's good pitching, and that's. I mean, you really got to have a hitting ball club to say, wow, they're just such good hitters. But, and I've told you this many times, if for the viewers that tune in, when it gets down to the playoffs and the World Series, it's the pitching that you know, a lot of 4-2, 3-1 ball games, and no matter how good hitters are, that they get shut down. And a lot of the numbers that these guys put up against the 4 and 5 pitching of the lower division teams are negated during the playoffs and World Series with the top of the line pitching. So, so pitching is, you know, you got to have hitters, but pitching is quality pitching gets you to the finish line.
Looking back at the off season, which is rapidly coming to an end, which teams do you think bettered themselves the most, and which teams do you think didn't help themselves a whole lot?
Well, I really think the Yankees helped themselves. The two guys that they got, the two main guys that I thought they got, and we were talking earlier about CC Sabathia or Teixeira. Well, those guys really weren't out there. To me, those guys are once every 10 years become available guys. I mean, they are. And it really wasn't an A-Rod or somebody out there you could go get this year of that high quality. But I think they really filled a need with Granderson. I thought that was an excellent pickup for them.
And that's the one, you know, following baseball, I didn't know Granderson was even on their radar, at least reading the New York sports pages.
Well, I think they did a good job of covering it up because the New York papers, there's so many. So I really think that they did a great job of staying underneath the radar on that. And I think he fills their needs well. And he gets them younger. And I think Cashman has said that. And I think most people that talk about the Yankees, if there's an issue, you know, with the Matsuis and Damons, you know, they're getting a little creaky, a little old. And, you know, our favorite guy, Posada, you know, is getting older. And, you know, so, you know, Rivera, although still very good, you know, you start looking down the road and you start going, okay.
Oh, yeah.
What's going to happen here? So,
yeah.
And really the guy from Atlanta, a guy that we had talked about getting, and Atlanta was in a situation where they had an abundance of starters, and they wanted to move Derek Lowe, but his salary and his pitching ability were not as good as Javier Vasquez, and Vasquez has been there, and he had an excellent year with Atlanta last year. Now you're going to get naysayers that say, well, he didn't do so well in New York the first time, and
But I read somewhere that he had an injury that he was covering up, and that his arm had maybe gone bad, and he wasn't telling anybody. That came out in some stories as well.
Well, all I can tell you is that when I saw him with Montreal several years ago, and when I saw him in Atlanta last year, he was a guy that I covet, and I think that was an excellent pickup. I think with the Red Sox getting Lackey, I thought that was something that they had to counter with, and they did, to stay as one of the top rotations, because I think both the Yankees and Red Sox have the top. But I thought, Melky Cabrera's a nice player, but Javier Vasquez was a difference maker last year.
Mm-hmm.
I would argue he was one of the top 5 pitchers in the National League at least. He was very good.
The one knock I've seen on Granderson is his batting average against left-handed pitching is 180 something. Is the Yankees pitching coach good enough to straighten him up, or do you think that's just an aberration?
I think it's a little bit of an aberration. I think that he got home run happy, and his average has always been okay. And he did hit. I think he got hit in home runs. I think he got close to 30 the last couple of years. So he probably went more for the home run. And the averages came.
And you see that, if memory serves, and it may not because I'm getting on in years, but the year that Roger Maris hit 61 home runs, I don't think he hit 300.
No, I believe it was 260.
I was glad you said that, because I thought it was in 260s. So
I
there
believe it was the 260s.
I think you're absolutely right. And so there you see that this sort of thing coming on.
Yeah, in his older years, I believe when he came with the Cardinals in '67, I believe he hit 300, but maybe he had 19 or 20 home runs.
Mm-hmm.
So, but there are guys, that's why, Pujols is Pujols, because he hits average and home runs. And Babe Ruth did too.
And not many like that anymore.
No, there's not many like that anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why Pujols is such a high commodity. He does everything. I mean, you start talking about Triple Crown guys, and if you hit home runs, the RBIs are probably going to be there close to it. It's the average. That's the thing. And Pujols just, I mean, you just got to say he's the guy. He's hard to pitch to.
You mentioned John Lackey and the Red Sox. Did the Red Sox help themselves to the same degree the Yankees did?
Lackey is huge. Really, I was a little surprised that they let Jason Bay go. And, Bay's a very nice ball player. But I think they decided that they had X amount of dollars to spend, and Lackey was the guy that they needed, and they went for him. Going along the same lines of pitching is the number one thing we need to go for.
And also the Red Sox. That's another aging team. When you think about, of course, the 1-2 with Ramirez and Ortiz, that was the most feared hitting combo in baseball in years. And they're breaking up this old gang of mine. So that's another thing. The youth movement there. How old is Lackey, by the way?
Lackey is, I believe, 33.
And that's
he's been around, but I believe he's early 30s. If I had to guess, I believe he's early 30s. So he's got. I saw him pitch last year. Was looking at some free agents, and I got a chance to go to the American League and see some guys, and I saw him throw, and he's a quality guy. He's an extreme competitor, and which I know the Red Sox will like. He's very good, but I think the thing about Lackey is he didn't really have his best stuff, and when you get down to scouting, sometimes you go to the ballpark and you see a guy who is pretty good, but you've seen him before, and he's not quite there. He's the breaking ball's not there. He's kind of scuffling. He can't throw it for a strike, and the guy still throws a heck of a game and wins. Maddox, Glavine, guys like that. And that's your true guy, because if you talk to pitching coaches and baseball, or if you talk to a pitcher, and he'll say, I just didn't have it today. I mean, some days they got it. They're on. And other days they're not. And that's part of it. Nobody's on all the time. It's just like life itself. Some days are better than others.
And we've talked about this before, and that's one of the things that fascinates me about baseball is how can a guy go out and pitch a one-hitter and his next term they hit him like a batting practice pitcher. I mean, the intangible there is what is the difference in those days?
Well, you know, the arm, and you know, and when you pitch and you throw, there's some days when your arm, you know, when you go through a long season, some guys are more resilient, other guys aren't. You know, sometimes the humidity of the game that you pitched in last time drained you. Maybe the conditions, you know, they're pitching in Colorado, and you know, you're up in the elevation, or you're Florida, it's muggy, and so we talked about baseball and the reasons why it's a great game. There's a lot of different factors involved, and the arm is a strange thing. Having played and pitched some and played shortstop, it's just some days you go out and, you know, it's there, you know, just easy, and you throw great and you feel good. And then some days it's not, and then some days but more so than just the strength is the command. With pitchers, it's so much of, you know, a good hitter, you know, with Pujols, you know, if you throw 100, you might throw it past him, but, you know, guys don't throw that hard, but if you throw it down the middle and you're throwing 95 and you don't know where it's going, I mean, good hitters are going to hit it. So it's also about placement, and some days that's better too. So it's a combination of, but back to Lackey, he threw extremely well and he wasn't on. Very impressive to me, because that's what I want to see. You know, if a guy's on and whatever, you go, wow, you know, but you know from your experience that it's not going to be like that. So if you know you're kind of seeing a guy and he really doesn't have his good stuff and he still competes and he wins, that's a guy that gets my attention anyway, because it's just not going to happen. A guy's just not going to go out and be consistent every day.
Knowing that we're in the midst of Cardinal country, how about the Cardinals the off season? Did they help themselves, and how do they look in 2010?
Well, I think they joined the crowd of a lot of us, Brewers, a lot of the National League teams, probably other than the Phillies. You know, Brad Penny they got, and he has been good in the past. He's been so lately. There's some question about him. There's questions about some holes. You know, they got a young kid at some young guys at third base. But that's not unlike a lot of us. They hang their hats, obviously, on Pujols. They did sign Holiday, who gave Pujols a lot of protection. Ludwig, you know, if he has the year he had in 08 instead of 09, then you're talking about a lineup that's formidable. But when you got Carpenter and Wainwright, you know, that's just one. If you're talking about the top two guys, you'd match those guys up with anybody. So that's a good start. So I would say you would have to think they're the favorites in the National League Central, just because of the Pujols and whatever else their offense can do. But when you go Wainwright and Carpenter, and then, you know, if Penny's good, Loesch has been there and done it, and has pitched well for him. So that's a good start. So, but I think that if you look at particularly the National League, and if you ask who's the favorite, you know, the National League West, I kind of look. The Dodgers didn't really. I think the experts would say they really didn't help themselves. A lot of people were shocked that they didn't re-sign Wolf, and we jumped on them. And you know, they've got some young arms that have been up and down, and you know, there's everybody's got holes. You know, the Giants have Kane and Lincecum. You know, and after that, you know, there's some holes. So everybody's got holes, which makes it exciting. And I'd have to say the three teams that stand out as they don't have that many holes would be the Phillies in the National League and the Red Sox and Yankees in the American League.
So the Phillies, you think, maybe back in the Fall Classic?
I do. I think Holiday is. I don't get to see Holiday that much, but the American League scouts that I talk to tell me that he's this much better than the best pitchers in the National League. They rate him. Yeah, they say he's the guy. So even though they lost Cliff Lee to Seattle, and it gets with Cliff Lee and Felix Hernandez, that's another good 1-2 combination. But then after that, they're like a lot of us. Who knows? But The Phillies, I think the Phillies are very solid. I really like their position guys. They've been there, and they're solid, and their rotation is good, and Holiday makes them really good.
Another thing, we've talked about this before, about what makes Major League Baseball interesting is just about every year a team comes from out of nowhere. I'm thinking of the Marlins a few years ago, the Rays. Any possible team out there that could come from out of nowhere and get up there and compete with the obvious choices?
Well, yeah, that's. I think the Marlins, even though they let a lot of guys go, but they have such a young, very good starting rotation. They are outstanding, and it's the team you don't hear much about. They happen to be a team that I cover, but they compete, and they compete, and they don't have a lot of money to go get extra guys. That's always kind of been their problem the last few years. If they need an extra guy, they really are limited financially, and they don't do it. But they've got Nolasco, a young pitcher named Josh Johnson, who is all-star every year. He lefty named Sean West, who's very good. Another guy, Andrew Miller, who they got from the Tigers, another good young lefty. These are all guys, 28 at the most, 22 to 23 at the youngest. 5 guys who are very good, and they're young and they've been up and down a little bit, but they've been there for a couple of years. So if I had to say a team, or if they happen to get everything together, and if we go back to our theme of starting pitching, get you there, I would say the Marlins might surprise some people. Mm-hmm. They fly under the radar some.
Yeah. Getting back to the Yankees, your former team, when you were an amateur scout, one of your signees is back with the Yankees, a guy you were very high on a few years ago. Mm-hmm. You were on the program, Marcus Thames. Were you glad to see him back with the Yankees?
Yeah, I think it's good. Well, yes and no. The Yankees are so deep. There's more competition than, say, if he went with Kansas City or somebody. Mm-hmm. But I'm sure he liked going back to the original team he signed with, and I think the Yankees feel like he can help them out, and I think they want some. They've got some lefties, and I think he gives them some right-handed pop off the bench. Mm-hmm. So I think they see him as, and that's kind of the way the Tigers used him the last year. He had the one good year where he hit in the mid-20s, I think, and shocked everybody. But he's a quality right-handed bat, and probably not an everyday guy at this point. But I think they feel like he's going to be their extra outfielder that hits from the right side. Mm-hmm.
Going back to the last time you were with us in November, you told us about the circumstances in which you signed Jorge Posada. Marcus Thames, what made you decide that this guy was Major League material, Yankee material?
Actually, that's a good story. Again, he was also a late round pick. Nobody else really liked him. He was like 30th round. And I had a good friend of mine who was a junior college coach in Mississippi, and it was a little town out in the middle of nowhere. And Marcus was a basketball player in high school, and there was actually another kid on the team that I had seen in high school that I wanted to work out, and it was a Monday off day, and I told the coach, I said, I'm too old to throw a bat in practice to this guy. Bring out this Thames kid because I want them to throw to each other and watch him hit. And as it turned out, I like Marcus better, and he was kind of the tag-along guy to the workout I had. And so I started watching him more and more. And the thing that got me actually was something very simple. When I was a college coach, I would put a ball on a batting tee and, take it to its simplest form and have the guy take a swing and, work on little things like the grip and things that sometimes guys don't know or what I think they should do. And his wrists were so fast and so quick, it was a shocker just hitting off the tee. And I told the coach, I said, those wrists look like Henry Aaron's wrist. They were just very fast. And so I guess all my years of coaching at Murray and throwing soft toss to guys and watching them swing off the tee, that's when it hit me, and it was just one of those things that you do for a long time, and it's a comparison basis where if you go out and see a guy swing, go, yeah, he's good, but I had really broken it down being a college coach and watched the guy swing, and it was one of those things that, boom, just hit me, and that was what I liked. I just simply swinging off the tee. Now, he was very raw, and that's why nobody else liked him. He wasn't developed. He was mostly a basketball player in high school, and this was his first year at junior college, the four-year schools in Mississippi, which has a lot of very good four-year colleges, baseball-wise, and he was a local junior college. And it was in a little town called Decatur, Mississippi, and Jorge Posada played at a little junior college in Decatur, Alabama.
Right. Yeah.
And if I had Illinois, I'd go look for a junior college in Decatur, Illinois, I guess, and go for the trifecta.
That's a good place, yeah.
So two of my better guys, and they were both, since they were so far out in the middle of nowhere, I joked with the junior college coach. He used to say that they had the highest percentage of, the government witness protection people in that town because it was so far out in the middle of nowhere. And,
and ball players, a lot of them just come from Mickey Mantle, Commerce, Oklahoma, these little obscure places. And again, that's what we've talked about scouting is as a fan, yeah, I can tell who's a pretty good player, but you guys see things that we just don't see.
Well, and they come from California and Texas that are highly populated, and if you go by the numbers, they do, but that doesn't mean that there's not and that's the stories, and that's why the stories are good of them.
Oh, they're terrific stories.
From the smaller towns, because, they're just, you just don't know.
Yeah.
Bang for the buck, you're going to go to the higher populated areas,
sure,
just by numbers wise. It's like the salesman going somewhere, but that doesn't mean. And I guess maybe playing and coaching for Murray, which is maybe a little smaller, I maybe pay more attention and say, where other scouts would just go, well, why bother? I mean, you're just going to be picking needles through a haystack type thing. And a lot of times you do. I've gone a lot of wild goose chases in little towns that I can't even remember or pronounce anymore, Barry, but occasionally you go to some out-of-the-way place and there is a ball player there. And it's a little romantic, it's kind of fun, and I've had a couple in Posada and Marcus that were late round picks and in smaller places and didn't really get a lot of attention. So that part of amateur scouting I do miss, kind of digging them up. I think there's more combines, believe it or not, in baseball now, like football, which more and more, it's harder, I think, they tell me, to find a guy out there in the middle of nowhere. But a lot of times you're just lucky. I think I was lucky with a lot of them. There's been some that out-of-the-way places that I thought would do better than they did, and they didn't get out of A ball. So it's part of the process. But it is fun when it happens.
Oh yeah.
And you do get kind of people kind of start looking, and they maybe start following you around to see where you're going when you do something.
In the 5 minutes we have left, let's look at the future. We agreed that this year, in terms of free agents, wasn't as dramatic as it was last year. Next year is apt to be a different story. Some big-name ball players are going to be out there. Predict the future of these star players.
I'd say the number one guy is the MVP. The best player out there is Joe Mauer, and mostly because of the position. And he is by far and away, because of his age and because of just being the best in the game, catching and playing the position, he is the guy. And
is he one of Phil Roof's former players?
No.
Okay, he came after Phil.
I think Phil was gone from there by the time Joe got there.
Okay. But this guy is compared to Yogi Berra. I mean, the great catchers of the game. Yeah,
he's amazing. He'd signed to play at Florida State football, I believe, out of high school.
I think I read that.
So he's an outstanding athlete, was an unbelievable quarterback, and I believe was rated in the top 10 by the football people. But the Twins drafted him, and
Now he's also a homegrown Minnesota guy, isn't he?
Yeah.
And of course, that's what the sports writers were talking about. Will he stay out of loyalty to his home state, or
You know what? I was in Minnesota this summer, also, and they were talking about it. And of course, I think the new stadium may be in fact saying, "Hey, we got to do something." I don't know if that was the Joe Mauer thing or whatever. However, they don't have a dome on it, so he might go somewhere else because it might be. I don't think global warming's got there just right yet. I mean, maybe in a few years, but a lot of the scouts are saying we're not going to see Minnesota in April, and I think that. I don't think they've got but maybe 5 or 6 games in April this year. It is an outdoor stadium. I did see it last year. It's beautiful. Mm-hmm. It's nice, but back to your question, he is, but he really hasn't showed his hand. And if I had to guess, I would guess he would stay. But I think that's 55-45. Mm-hmm. I think with, the agents get involved and the money, and if they say, well, the Yankees, Posada's 38, and the Yankees need a catcher next year, the Yankees would be the team that would say that. The Red Sox would get involved, and you got a bidding war, and he may say, hey, now he's going to have enough money. Now, is he the type of kid that says, I love Minnesota? Minnesota comes and makes him a comparable offer, and he would say, well, this is going to be enough. He's got enough probably now, really. I mean, compared to how you and I are trying to get through this thing. So I think it's a great story, and it's one of those tugging, are you going to stay in Minnesota? And I think he's the kind of guy that might, I don't know. I really haven't heard people say. There was talk about it, and I asked people in Minnesota about it, and nobody could give me an insight, any inside scoop as, well, this guy's really going to stay. And I think that his agent just tells him, be quiet and let's see what happens, and let's see what, the negotiating process, and we're talking so much money that, Minnesota, I think is trying to sign him to an extension, and I think they're just playing it out, which.
We've got 30 seconds left. 2 other big names. Pujols is Mr. St. Louis. Derek Jeter is Mr. New York. Will they ever leave?
I would say the chances, I would say Jeter, no. I think that the Yankees are such a, I would
He was
bet.
a Yankee fan when he was a kid.
I don't think there's any way Jeter leaves. He retires as a Yankee.
Pujols?
Pujols, I would probably say with the Cardinals, but I don't know. I don't know if his affiliation with the Cardinals is. I feel stronger about Jeter staying with the Yankees than Pujols. And I would say that odds are Pujols will stay with the Cardinals, but I would lay my lot with Jeter.
We have about 10 seconds left. Name the National and American League champions and the World Series winner in 2010.
This is really boring. I picked the Yankees to beat the Phillies again.
There you have it. We'll have to have you back at the end of the season and see how that turns out. My guest today was Leon Wurth. I'm Barry Craig. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time.